You are tuned into the Dr. Tina Show with Dr. Tina Moore. For more, visit drtina.com. On this episode of the Dr. Tina Show, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 ways that you can royally screw yourself when using Ozempic. As you know, on this podcast, I've been doing a whole series about Ozempic done right, GLP-1 agonists, and I've taken deep dives into it. I've launched a 4-part free video training series I'll link to in the show notes that you guys can watch where I dive even deeper. And I've gotten a lot of questions. I have a decently large platform. It's not huge, but I got a couple 100,000 followers across the platforms, and I get messages from people all the time. I get a lot of questions, and I wanted to make sure that I touch on these because I am seeing the same mistakes over and over and over again. I'm even seeing it in my patients where people erroneously think they can use a GLP-1 agonist like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy as a monotherapy, meaning a standalone therapeutic, and the clouds will part and the skies will rain down glorious weight loss and wonderful things. And that's just not how it is. This is not ideally to be used as a monotherapy standalone. And while there's a lot to unpack there, and I go deep into it inside of my program, my paid program called Ozempic Done Right University, what I want to share with you today is the top 10 ways that you can royally screw yourself over when using Ozempic. These are very common, so let's jump in. Number one, you've heard me say it before, cranking the dose up too high, too fast. These peptides are not designed to be overdosed on, yet that seems to be what the standard protocol is. Now, that's not to say every doctor's doing it that way. A lot of smart doctors that I'm hearing from are dosing the patient up to tolerance to where they're getting the results they want and they're not cranking them over. The normal escalation pathway of the brand name is a 16-week escalation where they essentially double the dose every month. I personally think the starting dose is too high in most cases, but these are pre-filled pens and there's not a lot we can do with it unless we go with a compounded version. So cranking the dose up too high, too fast is a surefire way to run smack into horrific side effects, severe nausea, crush your appetite, lose weight abruptly, end up with Ozempic face and Ozempic butt, and have a whole host of terrible things happen downstream to your metabolic health. If you lose all of your muscle mass in the process of starving yourself as you overdose on these peptides or are overdosed on them, you will end up with no muscle. And then quite literally will gain all the weight back. And when you go off of them, and now you're left with no muscle, and that weight is replaced solely by fat. It's a disaster. I cannot emphasize this enough. That is a complete disaster and a terrible way to do things. That will leave folks worse off than when they started. Number two way to royally screw yourself when using Ozempic is to try to push through the nasty side effects. If you're getting nausea and vomiting, you're dosed too high, period. So you need to talk to your prescribing practitioner. These are prescription-only medications. You need to talk to the person who is running that prescription, and you need to come to an agreement on how you can either back down or figure out what's going on. Maybe you switch to a different one, but you don't need to push through nasty side effects. They're completely unnecessary when this is done correctly. Number three, continuing to eat non-nutrient dense, crappy food, only less of it. You know who you are. I'm not pointing any fingers or laying any blame, but if you're accustomed to eating a diet of garbage and you simply just choose to eat a smaller portion of that garbage, you're still going to be left malnourished and you're still going to be left in a pickle, and you're going to end up in scenario number one that I just shared with you. So do not starve yourself of the nutrients you need. Eating less volume of crappy food is not the solution. You only have so much room in that stomach bag. It's a pouch, it's a bag, and you only have so much room in there. So make sure that what you put in it counts, because this is not something you can catch up with later. If your appetite is being suppressed and you're on a weight loss journey. Now, side note, if you go back and listen to my other podcasts, I'm talking about using GLP-1 agonists at very different doses for very different reasons. But in this case, we're just going with what the average person is using it for, which is usually weight loss, type 2 diabetes. You can't catch up later. You can't just look at your watch at 8 o'clock at night. Does anyone even wear a watch anymore? You can't do that and decide you didn't get any of your protein macros in for the day and try to stuff those in. You just can't do it. There's no way. You can't catch up. You will overstuff yourself. You will end up sick. You'll be up all night with a stomach ache, and that's not a fun place to be. So make the foods you eat count and don't just eat a smaller portion of the crappy foods you're used to eating. That is not going to land you long-term on the success track with these. Number 4, trying to continue to crush high-fat fried foods and ultra-refined carbohydrates. This seems to be the 2 food groups that get people the worst when it comes to the side effects with these GLP-1 agonists. Even those of my patient base who I'm dosing on microdoses. If they eat something that's fatty, and I'm talking generally like the not so healthy fats, but if not like a ribeye, I'm talking like a fried food, French fries, foods you shouldn't be eating in the first place, they will report feeling nausea and or wanting to vomit. So there's something about the way the GLP-1s work in the body. I'm guessing it has something to do with the central nausea centers in the brain. They are full of GLP-1 receptors themselves, and how dense that bed of receptors is individual by individual, right? It's different for each person. So some people are going to experience more nausea on these and some people will experience less, but we can't aggravate that, and certain foods seem to aggravate that. So the super fatty, high fat foods, fried foods, and then the ultra refined carbohydrates. Don't eat that shit anyway, you guys. It's terrible for you. Heed my warning on this one. Especially if you crush those foods, you're trying to get some cheeseburgers in at night or something. It is a recipe for disaster. Trust me. I've been there myself. I've seen it happen with people. It doesn't go over well. Number 5, probably the most important one if you don't want to end up in that brittle metabolic disaster mess of wasteland that I described in number 1, which is not protecting your muscle by not prioritizing your protein macros and strength training. We have to have a talk here. This is not negotiable. If you want to go on GLP-1 agonists and have any semblance of success in the long run, you have to protect your muscle at all costs. Ladies, I'm looking at you. Older you get, the harder it is for your body to maintain its muscle mass. Most women in the United States are already walking into a hip fracture. They're walking into frailty, they're walking into sarcopenia, and they are walking into a hip fracture, if not a fracture somewhere else in their body, because of severe osteoporosis, because they didn't eat enough protein, especially in midlife, and they did not prioritize strength training. I get it. Society has done a number on us. I grew up in the generation where it was like, be as skinny as humanly possible because we had Kate Moss as a supermodel. And that was that was our goal. Like, look as wafy and malnourished as we could and as skinny as we could. I get it. We've done some serious damage to ourselves already. If you're in my age cohort, I'm 50 years old. This is middle age. We've already done a lot of damage to ourselves. We've already been exposed to a lot of terrible foods in our lifetime. We were the generation that got brought up on artificial sweeteners. We were the generation brought up with the fake fats and all the nonsense, right? We got fed all the nonsense that the big food could come up with. And it was tested on us before it was, decided if it was going to make it to the next generation. We already have osteoporosis, most women my age. Most women my age are a mess. So do not assume because you're losing weight, everything is great. Oh, I fit in my high school jeans again. Yeah, well, that's a disaster if you're all fat and bone. So you have got to prioritize strength training, and you've got to prioritize eating your protein macros. And doctors, if your patients are not complying, you pull the prescription away. I have no problem doing this. If a patient is not compliant, I do not provide the prescription anymore. It's over. That's it. Until they can be compliant, they don't get the carrot. So just heed my warning, all of you, practitioners, health professionals, general public taking these peptides. If you're not prioritizing your muscle mass and getting adequate protein in on the regular, you are shooting yourself in the foot, quite literally, or looking at a hip fracture sped up, because we're already looking at hip fractures because we're not taking good care of ourselves as a age cohort. Number 6, assuming it's a monotherapy. This is not a monotherapy. This doesn't do great by itself, especially cranked up on high doses. We really want a full orchestra of benefits, and that means other peptides, bioidentical hormone replacement, making sure that we're optimizing certain organ systems of the body, we need the whole thing working together in order for these to have the most effect and to be able to keep them at the lowest doses and have them work. Remember, I've said this before, and if you haven't heard me say it before, hear me now. Microdosing and low doses do not work on those who are not metabolically optimized. So if you're not walking into this with muscle, having been strength training already, having been on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, doing all the things already, you're probably not a candidate for success with a microdose. That doesn't seem to be wanting to go through people's ears into their brains because I'm getting messages from people saying, I have 60 to 80 pounds to lose and I want to try your microdosing strategy. And I'm like, no, that is not reserved for people who have 60 to 80 pounds to lose. People who have 60 to 80 pounds to lose are probably looking at more standardized dosing. That doesn't mean they have to crank it out into oblivion, but they're looking at definitely more standardized dosing. Keeping the doses very, very low and being able to cycle them and go on and off of them with flexibility is reserved for those who are metabolically sound. So if you're not metabolically sound, you need to get metabolically sound. The cool thing is GLP-1 agonists will help with that. They do actually help heal metabolism. So I'm not saying don't start it. I'm saying once you go on it, get your ass in gear and get your shit together and take this seriously because you have a window of opportunity here and you really don't want to have to crank these peptides up. Any peptide, any hormone will eventually have receptor insensitivity if you are bombarding the system with it. So if you're flooding the cells with a peptide or hormone, it will cleave off its receptors and you'll have to take more and more and more. So we don't want that to happen. And we want to be able to keep these as low as humanly possible so we're not walking into nausea land. I'll give you a scenario. I've heard this multiple times. I actually heard it today. People are hitting plateaus on the low doses. And I'm like, well, are they strength training? Are they prioritizing protein? Are they on bioidentical hormone replacement? No. Well, then why are you low dosing them? Of course they're going to hit a plateau because there's other work to be done. And that other work is absolutely critical and non-negotiable if you want these to work, period. Even if you want them to work at high doses, you'll hit a wall if those things are not dialed in. So you have to do all the things in order for these to work optimally. And using them as a monotherapy, I think, is a huge mistake. Taking a patient, especially a patient who's dealing with obesity and type 2 diabetes, and simply saying, here's your GLP-1, let's crank you up on the standard dosing. Good luck. It's a real travesty. I think that's actually an ethical issue. Like, that's a problem because that's not how this is going to work. It may work in the short term. It's certainly not going to work in the long term. And again, they may very well end up like scenario one that I shared with you when people are just frail, lost all their muscle, and just totally metabolically devastated. So don't use it as a monotherapy, guys. If you don't know how to do a comprehensive treatment protocol, you're going to want to grab my program because I go through it in there. The program is for healthcare professionals, doctors. I'm getting great feedback from the doctors in there saying, thank you so much. This is so informative. I'm learning how to treat my patients more holistically. I'm learning the language to use with them. It really is to make doctors better doctors, but it's also open to the general public because I want you guys to be fully educated around what it is that you're taking and this journey you're going on. You need to know what all the moving parts are, and you need to know how to find a doctor to prescribe this way. So there's a whole module dedicated in there to how to find a doctor, talk to your doctor. If your doctor's not going to cooperate, what to do next. There's 5 different steps in there on how to find someone to work with, and people are having good luck if they're proactive. You have to be the most potent advocate for your own health, and it's going to take some groundwork and it's going to take some research. It's not as simple as calling your doctor or calling your pharmacy and saying, do you offer microdosing? They're not going to have a clue what you're talking about. I literally came up with this concept, and I'm not saying I'm the only one doing it because there are more people doing it now, especially those taking my course hopefully are doing it, but I still am hearing from those same doctors that are supposedly doing microdosing, and it's still in their head to use it for weight loss. And they're still missing some important pieces along the way. So heed my warning in that we don't want to be cranking GLP-1, hoping for the best, and wondering what the heck the long game is. There has to be a long game on this, right? I know we all go into it excited and we're like, what's going to happen? And oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Well, that's the short-term treatment plan. We have to have a long-term treatment plan. And good doctors will have both. When they meet you and they do an intake and they figure out what the protocol is going to be that they're going to start you with, they have a short-term version and they have a long-term version. And there's iterations in the middle. Those are called treatment plans, and they should stick to the treatment plan. And so I teach you what the short-term is and what the long-term is. Whether you're patient and or just the general public and you're looking to utilize these peptides optimally, or you're a physician or a healthcare professional, or maybe you're a strength and conditioning coach or a nutritional therapist, and you know you're going to be seeing clients on this, or you already are, and you want to just be really educated so you can help them the most, right? Like there's no downside to you having more knowledge. So I highly encourage you guys, check out my program. The free 4-part video series can be found at drtina.com. That's DRTYNA /Ozempic Uncovered. From there, you'll be given the opportunity to purchase the program at a discount. If you want to buy the program now at full price, it's on my website. You can just go to drtina.com /store and you'll find all my courses there. But that one's the big one. It's a great course. There's a great community in there. Everybody's working together. And I got some feedback this weekend that made me cry. Like my goal is to have this be the absolute most comprehensive, best program out there for the use of GLP-1 agonists. And this is nothing new to me. GLP-1 agonists or not, I'm giving you my entire clinical brain on how I approach a patient, on how I help optimize their metabolism. And GLP-1s are just but one tool in a comprehensive toolkit. I teach you the whole toolkit, including all the other peptides, some of which are over the counter. So it's really, really in-depth and it's really comprehensive. And for those of you who like to learn, this is for you. And if you're a clinician using these peptides or you're wanting to use them safely, this is absolutely the program for you. I wholeheartedly know that when you walk out of it, you will have the tools you need to use these in a way that don't bring on side effects, that don't make your patients sick, that don't put you at liability or risk. There's really an elegant way to do this, and I teach you all of that inside of the program. So I will leave that at that. All right, let's see here. Number 7, we're on to number 7, not optimizing your hormones with bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. That is a huge pitfall because GLP-1s are signaling peptide hormones. They're not steroid sex hormones, but they are still hormones. And if you want hormones to work well, you have to, 1, be insulin sensitive, 2, have your hormone profile optimized. Not perfect, not perfectly balanced, but you have to have some hormones on board if you need them. Otherwise, you're just fighting an uphill battle, truly. If you need testosterone and you need estrogen and you need progesterone to get your body composition, optimized, getting enough muscle mass on there, losing the fat readily, GLP-1s ain't going to be it if you're fighting that, right? So having all of that dialed in is really, really helpful. And in fact, there was a small study that came out recently. It was not a big one, but it did show that women who were on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, or just actually HRT, not necessarily bioidentical, they were on HRT and they took semaglutide, and then the control group was just on semaglutide, no HRT. And the group that was on HRT did much better and had better weight loss. So it proves what I've been saying. And again, this goes back to how I've been treating patients for decades. Some of us were not scared off by the crappy data inside that Women's Health Initiative study that came out 20 years ago that told us to be afraid of hormones and take all our patients off. Some of us actually read the study and realized that there was some garbage points in there. And now, just recently, they've come out and said, we looked at the same data set from 20 years ago and we realized that there was some garbage data in there. And actually, you should have your patients on hormones. And in fact, it's probably dangerous not to have your patients on hormones to some degree. So some of us were not listening 20 years ago to that terribly done study. And we were keeping our patients on hormones all these decades and people were doing beautifully. So there's a way to do all of that. And again, I teach it inside the program. All right, so number 8. Oh, this is a good one. Assuming it's not working because you hit a plateau, so you're going to crank up the dose and usually land yourself into some of the nasty side effects land. When in reality, you're still not lifting weights and you're still not eating well. I'll just leave that one at that because I think I've already harped on this enough. Number 9, not taking other things into consideration if the GLP-1 isn't doing what you want it to do. There are other factors here. There's toxicity, there's gut health, there's parasites, there's your stress load, there's lack of muscle mass going in. I'm going to say it again, there's stress load. Stress will destroy your metabolism. And so there's lots of other factors to take into consideration when they're not working. Again, I talk about all these inside my program because they're that important. We need to actually be aware of what these are. Now, it's not a full university program of how to deal with all of those. But again, I'm just trying to whet your palate and get you guys thinking about some things that need to be checked out. I mean, there's mold, there's reactive immune responses to things. There's all kinds of reasons why the body will hold on to fat or not have autoimmune disease clear up as much as we want it to, or not have some of the impacts that we're looking for if we're using for GLP-1s outside of diabetes and weight loss. There are other walls that we're going to run into, and we at least need to be aware of them. And number 10 of my top 10 ways to royally screw yourself over when using Ozempic is assuming this is a quick fix. This is not a quick fix, you guys. In fact, it's a slow and low process, and that's why I like it, because I like to do everything slow and low. I do not like shocking people's systems into change. Sometimes we got to pull out the big guns and do some emergency medicine. And when I say that, I mean sometimes we're doing regenerative things, or we're using hormones to try to get people to, get the needle to move. When it comes to GLP-1s like semaglutide and tirzepatide, you cannot go fast because your patients will be miserable or you will be miserable. Some of the problems we're seeing with the compounded version is that people are not pulling up the correct dose into their syringe, and they're injecting too much, and they're ending up in a world of hurt. So please, please don't do that. It is a terrible, miserable place to be if you get yourself caught into that. If you go to the ER, there's literally nothing they can do for you. They could probably start an IV line of fluids to make sure you're not going to end up dehydrated. And they might give you some anti-nausea medication. But if your receptors in your nausea centers are flooded with GLP-1 because you overdosed on it, you can't pull that back. You just have to wait for those receptors to get naked again. So it's a tough place to be, and you can't push this. You can't push the weight loss. You can't push it. You're not going to take it and a week later be 10 pounds lighter. In 3 months, you're going to start to see some appreciable weight loss. If you start losing weight too fast, I heard of from a colleague today, and she said some of her patients had lost, 20 pounds in 3 months. That's too fast for me, to be totally honest with you. I'm a big lose a pound a week kind of gal. So you're looking at 4 pounds a month. That's tops. If you want to maintain your muscle mass, that is tops. And more important than your muscle mass is your strength. These peptides do not destroy muscle. They actually are regenerative to muscle. They induce muscle regeneration. They are healing to the muscle. They do not destroy muscle on their own accord. The muscle loss is from the chronically low caloric state and the malnourishment and the underfeeding. That's what's leading to the muscle loss. And so we don't want to speed that up any by going too fast with too high a dose. So keep it low and slow, guys, and just know that the weight coming off needs to preferentially be fat. So you're strength training, you're hitting your protein macros, you're doing all the things. We don't want to crush the appetite to the point where people don't want to eat the protein either. So this is a standalone monotherapy. Hopefully the other 9 points that I made have gotten you to really understand and drive this point home. Used as a standalone monotherapy, especially at high doses, thinking this is the end all be all, it ain't it, you guys. And the dosing is also irrelevant. Everybody says, what's the dose, Dr. Tina? That is 9/10 of the equation. There's so much more to unpack here. So I highly encourage you to check out all my free content on it. I've got about 10 hours. Adding this one will make it close to 11 hours of free content on YouTube, on my website. My podcast is both on all the podcast players and it's on YouTube. If you want to check it out there, you can find it at my website at drtina.com, or you can find me on YouTube at Dr. Tina. And then I've got the 4-part video series training that you can check out, which is at drtina.com/Ozempic Uncovered. And it's a great, great bit of information. Even if you're vehemently against these, go get educated, because what you're hearing in the mainstream media, all the chirping and clickbait, it seems to be quieting down lately, but you're not hearing all of the truth. And in fact, you're hearing a lot of misinformation and a lot of lies. And it's been a very exciting time in the past few weeks because there's some good data coming out, basically just crushing all of those arguments that people are making, saying, well, it causes this and it's doing that. Actually, no, that's not what's happening at all. And the data is showing that. So I am not opposed to these when done right. It's when they are cranked up and people are cracked out on them and overdosed, and they end up looking like ghosts and bags of bones, and they end up just fat and bone, and they lose all their muscle, and then they become a metabolic wasteland. We don't want that. So anyway, I encourage you guys to check out the content, get educated, share it with your friends, share it with everyone, share it with your doctors. I have the data to support this. It's really not even that hard to look up. And inside my program, I give you all the data. I have a 20-some page document. It's a living document. My assistant adds to it daily. I'm constantly dropping studies into her file, and then she files them away, and it's listed by category. It's a phenomenal resource inside the program. So all the data is there by organ system, by impact. It's a great one. So anyway, I will leave you with that. I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. If you do definitely please head to your favorite podcast player and rate, review, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, please follow me. Check the bell down below and get subscribed so you're notified when I release a video. I really am trying to grow my YouTube. And when you guys give me reviews and you leave comments below and you do all the things, it helps other people see this. And I don't think these peptides should be vilified the way that they are. It's not the peptides' fault that people are managing them and dosing them wrong and that patients aren't being compliant all the time. So let's get the truth out there. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tina Show. Please be sure to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Tina, that's DrTyna, and Dr. Tina 2.0, as well as visit my website at drtina.com. This is a Resonant Media production produced by Drake Peterson and mixed by Chris McCone. The theme song is by John the Guilt. As always, you can email the show at podcast@drtina.com. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. See you next week. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.